Officer Martinez stepped out of his patrol car, surveying the scene with the weary expression of someone who'd seen everything twice. A chicken strutted past his feet carrying what appeared to be a small garden gnome in its beak. "Let me guess," he said, pulling out his notepad. "808 dispute." Karen opened her mouth to explain about property lines and covenant violations, but a particularly vocal rooster chose that moment to crow directly into her ear. She stumbled backward, her usual confidence cracking like an eggshell. "She destroyed my daughter's entire 4-H project." Beth Henderson was crying now, cradling a traumatized-looking silky chicken. "Emily's at her friend's house right now, and I have to call and tell her that Fluffy and Princess and all the others are scattered across the neighborhood because this woman went completely insane." The weight of Beth's words hit Karen like a physical blow. She'd seen 12-year-old Emily Henderson working with those chickens every morning before school, gentle hands feeding them, soft voice talking to them like pets. The girl had even given them all names, written in careful cursive on little wooden signs. "I was enforcing the rules," Karen whispered, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "Rules." Tom Henderson's face was purple with rage. "You traumatized livestock and endangered public safety because of rules. Look around you, Karen." She did look around, and what she saw made her stomach churn. Marcus, the driver, was on the phone with his supervisor, explaining why his delivery was now 3 hours behind schedule. The Patels were herding chickens away from their toddler, who was crying in fear. Old Mr. Kowalski was sitting on his porch, oxygen tank beside him, trying to shoo away a hen that had somehow gotten tangled in his medical tubing. "Ma'am, I need to understand what happened here," Officer Martinez said, his tone professional but strained. A small bantam had just deposited something unpleasant on his shoe. Karen found herself explaining the property line violation, the covenant restrictions, her decision to open the truck. With each word, she sounded more ridiculous to her own ears. The officer's expression grew increasingly incredulous. "So you opened someone else's truck and released their animals without permission because they parked wrong?" "It's not just about parking," Karen protested, but her voice was barely audible now. "It's about maintaining standards, about property values, about being a power-hungry bully." Beth interrupted. "That's what this is about." The accusation stung because somewhere deep down, Karen recognized a grain of truth in it. When had she become this person? When had enforcing rules become more important than basic human decency? Her phone rang again. This time it was Harold Fitzpatrick, the HOA president. She answered with trembling fingers. "Karen, what in God's name is happening?" "I've got 6 board members calling me, 3 lawyers on hold, and Mrs. Chen demanding your immediate removal from the association." "Harold, I can explain." "You'd better. Emergency board meeting, my house, 1 hour." "And Karen? You might want to bring a resignation letter." The line went dead. Karen stared at her phone, watching her reflection in the black screen. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her blazer was stained with dirt and worse, and her eyes looked hollow and frightened. Emily Henderson's bicycle rounded the corner, the 12-year-old pedaling fast, her face bright with excitement about seeing her chickens. Karen watched as the girl's expression changed from joy to confusion to absolute devastation as she took in the scene. "Mommy?" Emily's voice was small and broken. "What happened to my chickens?" Karen felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, a cracking sensation that had nothing to do with the chaos around her and everything to do with the tears now streaming down a little girl's face. The screeching of 43 chickens erupted from the back of the moving truck as Karen Pemberton yanked open the metal door, her perfectly manicured nails gleaming in the afternoon sun. Feathers exploded into the air like confetti at a twisted birthday party, and Karen's triumphant smile faltered as she realized she'd just unleashed poultry pandemonium on Maple Grove's most exclusive cul-de-sac. "What the hell?" shouted Marcus, the moving truck driver, as a particularly aggressive Rhode Island Red landed on his head, claws tangled in his baseball cap. Karen straightened her blazer, trying to maintain her composure as chickens scattered in every direction. "This is a completely justified response to a clear violation of HOA regulations," she announced to no one in particular, her voice slightly higher than usual. 20 minutes earlier, Karen had been conducting her weekly compliance patrol when she'd spotted the Hendersons' moving truck parked 3 inches over the property line. 3 inches. The audacity had sent her blood pressure soaring. But it was the discovery of the chicken crates in the back that had pushed her over the edge. Livestock were absolutely, unequivocally forbidden in Willowbrook Estates. Ma'am, you can't just. Marcus tried to grab a chicken that was now perched on his side mirror, pecking at its own reflection. Section 4.7b of the Residential Covenant clearly states, Karen began, but her words were drowned out by the sound of car doors slamming. The Hendersons had returned from their grocery run. Karen? Beth Henderson's voice cracked as she stared at the chaos unfolding in her driveway. What did you do? Her husband Tom emerged from the passenger side, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and rage in rapid succession. Those are my daughter's 4-H chickens. She's been raising them for 6 months. Karen felt the first flutter of uncertainty in her chest, but she doubled down. The covenant is crystal clear about livestock. I'm simply enforcing the rules that keep our property values stable. A fat hen named Gertrude chose that moment to defecate spectacularly on Karen's cream-colored BMW, the splatter hitting her windshield with a wet slap that made everyone wince. You absolute lunatic! Beth screamed, chasing after a small bantam that was heading toward the busy street. Emily's going to be devastated. Karen watched as the consequences of her decision scattered across the neighborhood like the chickens themselves. Mrs. Chen was shrieking from her front porch as 3 hens pecked at her prize-winning petunias. The Johnson's dog was barking frantically, straining against his leash, and somewhere in the distance, Karen could hear the unmistakable sound of sirens. We're going to sue you into oblivion, Tom growled, cornering a rooster near the mailbox. This is destruction of property, emotional distress, and whatever else my lawyer can think of. Karen's phone buzzed with incoming calls from other HOA board members. Her hands shook as she declined them, one by one. She'd wanted to make a statement about rules and order, but standing there covered in feathers with chicken droppings on her car, she was beginning to realize she might have made the biggest mistake of her perfectly organized life. The sirens were getting closer. 3 hours later, Karen sat in Harold Fitzpatrick's living room, surrounded by the 5 remaining HOA board members. Her resignation letter lay crumpled in her purse, unsubmitted. Outside, she could still hear the occasional cluck as neighbors continued the chicken roundup. 37 chickens recovered, 6 still missing. Harold read from his notes. 1 injured rooster, vet bills pending. Damage to the Chen's garden, the Kowalski's medical equipment, and various vehicles. Oh, and apparently Channel 7 News is sending a crew. Karen winced. Harold, I know how this looks. Do you? Margaret Sweetwater, the treasurer, leaned forward with ice in her voice. Because it looks like you've single-handedly destroyed this association's reputation and opened us up to massive liability. The chickens were a covenant violation, Karen said weakly, grasping for the righteousness that had driven her just hours ago. The Hendersons filed for a livestock exemption 3 months ago, Harold said quietly. Temporary permit for their daughter's 4-H project. I approved it myself. Didn't you get the memo? The words hit Karen like a sledgehammer. She remembered now. The email buried in her inbox, the one she'd marked as read during a busy week without actually reading it. Her mouth went dry. I must have missed. You destroyed a little girl's project over paperwork you didn't bother to read, Margaret continued. The legal exposure alone could bankrupt this association. Karen's phone buzzed with a text from her husband. Sold a news van. Coming home now. We need to talk. 23 years of marriage, and David had never used that tone in a text message. I want to make this right, Karen said suddenly, surprising herself. Whatever it takes. Harold raised an eyebrow. Karen, I don't think you understand the scope of. No. You don't understand. Karen stood up, something crystallizing in her mind. I spent so much time worrying about property values and perfect lawns that I forgot these are people's homes. Emily Henderson is 12 years old, and I made her cry because I was too arrogant to read an email. She pulled out her phone and started typing. "What are you doing?" Harold asked. "Setting up a GoFundMe for Emily's 4-H project. New chickens, new coop, entry fees for the county fair. I'm putting in the first $1,000. The room fell silent except for the sound of Karen's fingers tapping on her screen. "That's actually not terrible," Margaret admitted grudgingly. "I'm also stepping down from the board," Karen continued, "but not because you're forcing me to. Because I need to remember how to be a neighbor instead of a dictator." Harold looked at her carefully. "The lawsuits will probably happen anyway. But maybe if I start acting like a human being instead of a walking covenant manual, some of this can be fixed." As Karen left Harold's house, she found Emily Henderson sitting on her front steps, still in her school clothes, watching the last few neighbors chase down a stubborn Rhode Island red named Henrietta. Karen approached slowly, like you might approach a wounded animal. "Emily, I owe you an apology." The girl looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Mrs. Pemberton, you scared my chickens." "I know, sweetheart. I made a very big mistake, and I'm going to try to fix it. Would you like to help me pick out some new chickens?" Emily's face lit up with cautious hope. "Really? Even Princess Featherworth? She was my favorite." "Especially Princess Featherworth," Karen said, and for the first time in hours, she smiled genuinely. As they walked toward the Henderson house together, Karen noticed something she'd never paid attention to before: the way the late afternoon light caught the edges of the maple leaves, the sound of children playing in backyards, the comfortable chaos of a neighborhood that was actually lived in rather than just maintained. Behind them, Henrietta the Rhode Island Red finally surrendered to Mr. Kowalski's gentle coaxing, settling into his arms with a contented cluck. The old man's laugh carried across the street, warm and forgiving in the golden hour light. But in her purse, Karen's phone continued buzzing with calls from lawyers, reporters, and very angry neighbors. Some bridges, she was learning, took longer to rebuild than others. The real work was just beginning.